What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Pokemon TCG Pocket video. It's been about a week since Mythical Island came out, so we finally got a lot of data to look over now. So we're going to do the first ever Mythical Island meta report. Now, a couple things before we get into it. The first thing is take this with a big grain of salt because things are changing at the moment. There are some decks in here that might not be included. One I will mention right off the bat is Golem. I know people have been sort of picking up on Golem lately, so Golem is not included in this tier list. And things are ever changing, right? So things could change. This expansion has been out for just about a week now, so this is just very early data, so expect things to change. And the second thing is we're taking a look at PokemonMeta.com. Shout out PokemonMeta.com. I'll leave a link to their website down in the description below. I'm not affiliated with them, but I do like their website and their tier list because they take data from all the community tournaments. So with that all out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at the tier list here. And alone in tier 1, we have Mewtwo EX. Mewtwo and Psychic decks in general got a massive buff this expansion from Mew EX and Mythical Slab. If you look at top main deck here, it's not going to be an even 20 cards, and that is because it's going to be showing the most common cards people use in their decks. As you can see, 100% of the time people are running 2 Kirlia, 2 Gardevoir, 2 Pokeballs, 2 Research, 99% Mewtwo EX, and then so on and so forth, right? So what we actually probably want to look at more here is the sample decks. These are actually tournament topping decks, so let's take a look. This is from a top 32 placement 256 player tournament from December 22nd. Now this is a deck that I think looks really good here and what I'd expect to see more often. So we got 2 of the standard Mewtwo EX, right? 2 of the Gardevoir lines, that's pretty standard. 1 Mew EX, I think 1 is perfect. You can run 2 if you'd like, but I think 1 is fine. Jinx, I really like Jinx as well. It's good tech against the Celebi matchup. 1x speed, and then 1 leaf as well. Since Mewtwo EX does have a retreat cost of 2, sometimes you might find yourself wanting to use leaf instead of the x speed. And then 2 Pokeballs, 2 Professor's Research, 2 Mythical Slabs for some extra draw power and consistency, a Sabrina, and 1 blue. I think blue here is mainly for the mirror matchup, since Mewtwo EX's side drive does 150 damage, and Mewtwo himself has 150 HP, so you can one-shot an opposing Mewtwo EX with this move. But if you're up and against an opposing Mewtwo EX and you play blue, they can only do 140 damage, which means they are unable to one-shot you. And let's take a look at some other example decks here if we get any big differences. This is from another tournament. They're running 1 of the LGM and the BEM. I have expressed I'm a big fan of these cards, although I don't know if I would exactly fit them into a Mewtwo deck. This person's running a 1 of red card. We're going to see red card pop up in these tournament decks, but for ladder, I would not recommend it. I would recommend just playing something probably like blue instead, or just another item or supporter card, right? And then this one here, it's not run blue, but it runs Giovanni. That makes sense as well. This is a top 8 deck. You can see they're running no Mew EX, but they're running 1 of that basic Mewtwo. So if that dies, it's just worth 1 prize point. And from here on out, yeah, most of the decks are going to be looking pretty similar. This one is running 2 Mew EX and a 1 of Budding Expeditioner. This makes sense if you're running 2 Mew, I think, because you can pull it back, similar to Koga, pull it back to your hand and just fully heal it so they don't KO your Mew. So that could be pretty nice as well. And yeah, from here on out, we're just going to see a lot of similar decks. So for the most part, it does seem like Mewtwo has been figured out. I mean, not that it really changed all that much. All that was really added to these Mewtwo decks was Mew and Mythical Slab, and then a couple leaf and blue here and there, right? So that's it for tier 1. Mewtwo EX sits alone on top of tier 1, at least for now. Again, things can change. And now we get into tier 2. Here's where things get kind of interesting, right? Next best deck is Gyarados EX, then Pikachu EX, then Celebi EX, then Koga. Let's take a look at Gyarados EX first. Again, this main deck here is not going to be an even 20 because there's a lot of different ways that you can play this Gyarados deck. Of course, you want to have 2 of Magikarp and 2 of Gyarados EX. I would say you definitely want to run Misty. It's just, you got to run Misty, right? If you high roll, you're just winning the game. Some decks are running Druddigon, some decks are running a Greninja line, some decks are running Vaporeon. So let's actually take a look at some sample decks here from some recent tournaments. This is a top 32 placement, 256 player tournament. They're running 2 of the new Magikarp, which this Magikarp is just automatically better than the genetic Apex one because its attack is essentially a free retreat. It can retreat, but it doesn't discard the energy. 2 Gyarados EX, 2 of the Greninja lines, 2 of the new Druddigon, which this is just an excellent tank card to hide behind, 2 Pokeballs, 2 Professor's Research, 2 Leaf, and 2 Misty. I would say this is a pretty solid, like, standard deck here. There's nothing too much out of the ordinary, right? You just want to start off with your Druddigon, tank some damage. Its ability will do some damage back to your opponent's opposing Pokemon. If you need to retreat it, it has a retreat cost of 2, so you can use Leaf to retreat it for free. And then in the back line, you're building up your Magikarp into your Gyarados, your Froakie into your Greninja, and once your Gyarados is online, you're probably just winning the game at that point. And we take a look at another deck list. It's the exact same. I wonder if all these people were friends then that got together and made the same deck list. This one is running a 1 of Druddigon and a 1 of basic Gyarados. I'm not a fan of that personally. I would just rather play the Gyarados EX because 180 HP is a big difference from 150, right? Because 150 means that this gets one shot by Mewtwo EX, and 140 compared to 100 damage, that's a big difference as well. 140 is clearing more Pokemon such as Pikachu EX, Starmie EX, the legendary birds, just to name a few off the top of my head, whereas 100 is not one-shotting a lot of Pokemon. And taking a look at some other deck lists here. Yep, this one looks pretty similar. This one is running 2 Pokeballs, 2 Research, 2 Misty, 2 Leaf. Yep, pretty standard stuff here. 2 Gyarados, 2 Magikarp, 2 Druddigon. This is the 1500 player tournament that a lot of people like to reference Ursi's Pocket weekly. And yeah, this seems to be the standard deck list at the moment. I would say it's just 2 Gyarados, 2 Magikarp, 2 Druddigons, 2 Greninja lines, 2 Research, 2 Pokeballs, 2 Misty, 2 Leaf. This seems to be the standard deck at the moment. I know I messed around with this deck with Vaporeon. I think Vaporeon can be good as well, but as right now, this seems to be the main Gyarados EX deck. Now, moving along in Tier 2, we got Pikachu EX, which this deck has so much variety. It already had variety in Genetic Apex, but with the new Mythical Island cards, there's a ton of different ways to play this deck. Now you can see, there's Pikachu EX, right, which is the main card in the deck. Zapdos EX. These were usually 2 like the main cards in the deck, Pikachu EX and Zapdos EX. From there on forth, you can kind of customize it how you want to. You could play Raichu and Surge if you wanted to. Some decks were playing Voltorb, Electrode, and then some decks were playing Pincurchin, but Pincurchin is now essentially just replaced by Dedenne since it does the same thing but for 1 energy, right? So let's take a look at some actual deck examples here. So this version here, this is a top 32 player tournament, 2 Pikachu EX, 2 of this new Pikachu, which is the basic Pikachu that evolves into Raichu. It's essentially just a mini version of the EX version. It can do 10 damage for each of your bench lightning Pokemon. So if you have 3 bench Pokemon, it's doing 30 damage compared to the genetic Apex Pikachu that just does a 20 flat damage. Then we have 2 Raichu. This is the genetic Apex Raichu that does 140 damage flat. 1 Zapdos EX. 1 of these new Electabuzz I actually really like. It's similar to Zebstrika, where it can damage one of your opponent's Pokemon, whether it is in the active spot or on the bench. However, it takes 2 energy to attack and does 40 damage. But it is a basic Pokemon, meaning it's just ready to go. You don't need to find its evolution, right? So as long as you just put Electabuzz in the game, give him 2 energy, he's ready to attack anything on the board. And then a 1 of Dedenne. I really like this card a lot. This card just basically replaces Pincurchin. For 1 energy, you're doing 10 damage, but the damage isn't what's important here. It's the ability to paralyze your opponent's Pokemon. You flip a coin. If heads, your opponent's active Pokemon is now paralyzed. You're essentially just skipping their turn because they can't attack with that Pokemon and they can't retreat. So this can help you stall, and sometimes this can just steal games for you. And this version, we're running 2 XP, 2 Pokeball, 2 Research, 2 Surge since we are running Raichu, 2 Sabrina, 1 Giovanni. Yeah, this looks like a pretty good version if you want to play something with the Raichu. This one is slightly different. It's running, I think, the same thing, except it has 1 Genetic Apex Raichu and 1 Mythical Island Raichu. This Raichu is pretty interesting. So this one has 120 HP. It does Giga Shock, 60 damage for 3 lightning energy, but it also does 20 damage to each of your opponent's benched Pokemon. So this one I played around with a little bit. The biggest upside with this Raichu compared to the other one is this one does not discard its energy. This one attacks for 140, which is a lot of damage, but it discards all of its lightning energy. So you're probably just going to get this hit off once in the game. Whereas this, if you're doing damage to your opponent's bench multiple times, it can be pretty troublesome for your opponent. And then they are running 2 Giovannis instead of Giovanni Sabrina. This version here is running the Zebstrika package, and I actually really like Zebstrika. The reason I like Zebstrika is a couple reasons. One, it makes this deck going first better, because generally this deck likes to go second, right? Because you can energy Pikachu EX right away, and then on your second turn you're already attacking with Pikachu EX. But if you're going first, this deck kind of struggles. But with Zebstrika, if you're going first, you can evolve Blitzel into Zebstrika, and you can do 30 damage to any of your opponent's Pokemon. And this is actually really important because you can potentially snipe a Magikarp before it evolves into Gyarados, because Magikarp has exactly 30 HP. Zebstrika does 30 damage to a Pokemon in the active spot or on the bench. If your opponent does not draw and evolve into Gyarados EX, Zebstrika can just snipe that Magikarp and get rid of him. So I think Zebstrika is actually really important right now in this meta. And taking a look at some other versions from the 1500 player tournament, this is playing the basic genetic Apex Pikachu that does 20 flat damage instead of the one that scales with your bench. 2 Zapdos EX, 1 Raichu, genetic Apex Raichu, 1 basic Zapdos, which I think this is just a decent stalling card, right? 100 HP, non-EX Pokemon, retreats for 1. I don't think you're usually attacking with this. It's just there to act as a tank for you. Then you got 1 Surge, couple Giovanni, Sabrinas, Research, Pokeball, Speed, Potion. And this one is running the new Pikachu, new Dedenne, new Electabuzz, the old Raichu. So essentially there's a ton of different ways to play Pikachu EX, right? Like, it already had a lot of variety with the genetic Apex meta, but with the addition of the Mythical Island meta, there's a ton of different ways to play this. I don't think we have found like the optimal Pikachu EX deck yet. I have been experimenting with Pikachu EX. I'm hoping to put a video out on that soon here. Now, the thing with Lightning is that even though it is strong into the Gyarados EX matchup, it's still kind of tough because Pikachu EX gets one shot by Gyarados EX because Gyarados is doing 140 damage, right? And even if you're doing 90 damage plus the 20 weakness onto Gyarados EX, that's 110 damage. You still can't one-shot Gyarados EX because it has 180 health. So you need to attack twice with Pikachu EX into Gyarados, which is really tough to do. Even Raichu, the strongest hitter in the game, does 140 damage, plus the weakness, it does 160. Even if you add Giovanni, it does 170, which cannot one-shot Gyarados EX. So maybe there can be some potential there if you're able to weaken it with a Zebstrika or an Electabuzz beforehand, and then you can take it out with a Raichu. So that is Pikachu EX. There's still a bunch of variety with Pikachu EX decks. I think it has fallen off a little bit, but I don't think we found the optimal version of it yet. And moving on in tier 2, we got Celebi EX. Now, this was the meta monster like day one of the Mythical Island release, right? But now as time has gone on, I think people have moved away from this and moved towards Gyarados EX. You can see the main way to play this deck really is just having 2 of these Celebi EX and 2 of the superior lines. And then from there, you can kind of customize, what supporter cards you want, what item cards you want. And then 2 of Erica as well. I would say this is like a must in any grass deck, right? Some people are playing Execute and Executor. Some people are playing the other Executor from Mythical Island. Some people are playing Delmise. Now let's take a look. This is actually a first place deck here out of a 256 player tournament. 2 of the Celebi EX, 2 superior lines, 2 genetic Apex, Execute, and Executor. So Executor is still one of, if not the best Pokemon for going first, since you can evolve first, attack for 1 energy, and it has 160 HP, so you're able to tank a lot of damage. Then we got 1 XP, 2 Pokeball, 2 Research, 2 Erica, 1 Sabrina. And let's take a look at some other versions here. This one's a little bit interesting. This is top 4. This one is running 1 of the new Execute, which essentially just ramps a grass energy. 1 of the new Executor, which does the same thing as Jinx. It just does more damage depending on how much energy is attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. So this is good in other Celebi matchups or against water decks that have Misty high rolls. Caterpie for some extra consistency, which is a little bit interesting. I guess it's because they only run 1 Celebi EX and 1 of this superior line, so that's a little interesting. 2 red cards. I don't know if I'd recommend 2 even in a tournament, but they are running hand scope, which is kind of interesting. So I would say this is very much a niche version here. I don't think you're going to see a lot of versions of this deck. I think this is a very specific version of the deck. And let's look through some other versions real quick. This one I think is a little bit more standard. 2 Celebi EX, 2 of the superior lines. It is running 1 genetic Apex Execute, but it is running 1 Mythical Island Executor and 1 Executor EX. I think that could make sense. You can kind of pivot to whichever one depending on your matchup, and then the trainer cards look pretty solid to me as well. And then this version is actually running Petalil and Lilligant. I don't think you need to run Lilligant, to be honest. When you have Superior, I think Superior is just kind of a better Lilligant, but I will say, I guess the upside to Lilligant is that it is a stage 1 evolution compared to Superior stage 2 evolution, so I could see it in that sense, but I think Superior is probably still the way to go. And this one is running a 1 of Delmise. I express how much I really like this card. It can act as a solid tank for you. It's a basic Pokemon, so you don't need to evolve it. It has 100 HP. It's a non-EX, so it's only worth 1 point. It does 20 damage for 1 energy, but if it has 4 energy, meaning if you have 2 energy attached to it and you have Superior on the board, this Pokemon is attacking for 90 damage, which is really nice. There's a few different ways to play the Celebi EX deck, but I would say the main cards in this deck are going to be 2 Celebis, 2 Superiors, and then, of course, the 2 Research, 2 Pokeballs, 2 Ericas, and then from there you have a little bit of room to mess around with. Now this deck seemed like it was going to be taking over the meta day 1 of the expansion, but I think people realize that maybe Celebi EX is not that consistent since it does rely on coin flips. Like, yes, this card can get out of hand, but sometimes you're going to get unlucky with your coin flips, and I think also due to the fact that it has only 130 HP means it gets one shot by a lot of things. It gets one shot by Mewtwo. It gets one shot by Gyarados as well. So Celebi EX is still a strong deck. I don't think it's the strongest deck in the game right now, but I think it's still a pretty strong deck. And I think, yeah, tier 2 is probably where I would put it. And then lastly, in tier 2, we have Koga. Now the thing with Koga is it's actually more of a Scolipede deck, because we are running Koga with the Weezing package, right, from Genetic Apex. That is the same because Weezing can poison and it can tank damage where you pull it back with Koga to fully heal it. But we're also now running this Scolipede, which is a stage 2 evolution dark type Pokemon with 140 HP. For 2 energy, it does Venoshock for 70 damage. But if your opponent's active Pokemon is poisoned, this attack does 50 more damage for 120 damage total. So let's look at some example decks here. This is actually a first place one right here. This is running 2 of the Scolipede lines, 2 of the Genetic Apex Wheezing and Coughing, and then it's running a 1 of Tauros. This is actually a nice card that I like as a 1 of in some decks. It just does 120 damage to EX Pokemon, which there are a lot of EX Pokemon running around in the meta, of course. You know, Mewtwo, Gyarados, Celebi, Mew, so on and so forth, right? So this is just a good sort of tech card that you can build up in the back line if your Wheezing and your Scolipede don't get the job done for you. And then we're running 2 Leafs because Scolipede and Whirlipede do have a retreat cost of 2. 2 Koga. Koga's still insanely good with Wheezing, being able to pull it back and essentially just heal it for free. 1 Sabrina and 2 Professor's Research. Now this version of the deck is slightly different here. It's running 2 of the new Coughing. So this Coughing, instead of doing any damage, it just thins your deck essentially. So Division for 1 Dark Energy, put 1 random Coughing from your deck onto your bench. I don't know how much I love this because I feel like in a 20 card deck, like yes, thinning your deck does help out, but sometimes you just draw like both Coughings in your hand. You're just like, well, this is kind of useless. So maybe I could see like a 1-1 split of like the Genetic Apex Coughing plus 1 Mythical Island Coughing. Let me know what you guys think about that. And then for the most part, this one looks pretty similar, except they're running 1 of the new Salandit. So this card is a bit of a spicy addition. It's a basic fire type Pokemon, but it attacks for 1 colorless energy, so you don't have to add fire energy to your deck. It does 10 damage, but if your opponent's active Pokemon is poison, this attack does 40 more damage. So a basic Pokemon that can just do 50 damage for 1 energy is pretty valuable. I can see that as a 1 of in this deck, and I think it can catch people off guard. And with this deck as well, since it is dark, it is naturally going to be strong into Psychic decks, which are very much prevalent in the meta with Mewtwo decks, Mew decks, even some other decks like Gengar, right? So I think this deck does pretty well. And yeah, for the most part, from here on forth, it looks like most of the decks are pretty similar. This one's actually doing the what I was thinking of, a 1 of the new Coughing that thins, and then 1 of the old Coughing that just attacks for 20. Oh, and one thing to mention as well is this new Coughing actually has a retreat cost of 2 compared to this Coughing having a retreat cost of 1. I don't think it'll factor that much into games because you want to evolve into Coughing into Wheezing as fast as possible, and then you can just Koga the Wheezing. But there may be times where, hey, you want to retreat your Coughing because you didn't find Wheezing, and this one you can retreat for 1. This one you have to retreat for 2, so that could be a very big difference. All right, so that is it for Tier 2. Moving on to Tier 3, we take a look at Arcanine EX. Now, I'm going to go straight to the sample decks over here. We actually got a first place one I want to take a look at. So this one is running 2 Growlithe, 2 Arcanine EX, 2 Moltres EX, and 1 Mew. So this deck is pretty much the same as it was before, except it is running the addition of Mew now, which can serve as a tank. It can tank some damage for you, and you can pull it back with your Budding Expeditioner and heal it for free. It can also use Genome Hacking, or you don't even need to run Psychic Energy in this deck. Just run Fire, and then for Genome Hacking, 3 colorless energy. It can copy one of your opponent's attacks, so it can copy things like Gyarados, Mewtwo, Charizard, Celebi. So yeah, Mew is just an insanely good card that can fit into any deck, really. I like the Leaf here because most of the time you're going to be wanting to start off with a Moltres, ramp some fire energy. Moltres does take 2 energy to retreat, so you can use the Leaf to retreat for free. Giovanni, Sabrina, Pokeballs, Research, Speed, Potion, and then 1 red card. This one's a little bit different. This one is running a Salandit Salazzle combo, sort of as a backup Pokemon. I'm not sure how well this version performs. I think Mew might be better, but I could be wrong. And then from here on out, the rest of the decks look mostly similar. This one is running the 1 of Mew and a 1 basic Arcanine, which is essentially the same as the EX Arcanine, just a little bit weaker. I think Arcanine is still a really good card. 120 damage, is able to one-shot Celebi, because a Celebi has 130 HP, plus it is weak to fire, so this is doing 140. This is one-shotting Pikachu EX, so I think this is still This is still a really good card, and when you combine it with Giovanni, you're pushing to 130 damage, so you're able to clear 130 HP Pokemon. And yeah, from here on out, the rest of the decks look pretty similar for the most part. Yeah, I think the main Pokemon in this deck, from what I'm seeing, is 2 Growlithe, 2 Arcanine EX, 2 Moltres EX, a 1 Mew EX, and then, of course, you got your Pokeballs, Researchers, and then from there, you can play around with the item and supporter cards. So Arcanine EX still looks to be pretty good. And then next up in Tier 3, we got Charizard EX. So Charizard kind of fell off, and I think it's just because it's really slow, right? And because it's a stage 2 evolution Pokemon, you might not find all the pieces you need. Let's take a look at this first place deck here. This is running 2 of the Charizard EX lines, 2 Moltres EX, and this is running a 1 Growlithe and 2 Arcanine EX package. So people were kind of pivoting towards this at the end of Genetic Apex, where they're combining Charizard EX and Arcanine EX. The reason for that is because Charizard EX, like I said, takes a little bit longer to get set up because it requires 4 energy for his 200 damage attack, and it is a stage 2 evolution. So against Pokemon that have more than 120 HP that Arcanine can't kill, you would want to pivot into your Charizard EX line. But against some decks where the Pokemon has 120 HP or less, like let's say, for example, Pikachu EX, you can just pivot into Arcanine EX. He's a little bit faster than Charizard because he's a stage 1 evolution, and he attacks for 3 energy compared to Charizard's 4 energy. And then you got a couple Leafs, Research, 1 Sabrina, 1 Giovanni, 1 Speed, 2 Pokeballs. This version opts to cut out Arcanine completely. It's only running a 1 of Moltres. This one's running an old Amber, though, as sort of like a fossil tech, I guess, to thin your deck out a little bit more. I'm not too big of a fan of that personally, but I mean, if it works, then maybe it's worth it. This version got top 4 in a 256 player tournament. It's running 2 Charizard EX lines, 1 basic Charizard, and then 2 Moltres and 1 Mew EX. Again, Mew can just slide into any deck, really. Research Pokeballs for draw power, 1 blue. I'm not sure if blue is really necessary in this deck. I guess maybe because Charizard has 180 HP, that's going to survive like a lot of things. So I guess it's mainly to protect maybe the basic Charizard or maybe the Moltres or the Mew EX. I don't know. I'm not really sold on this basic Charizard, to be honest. I'd rather just take this out and put in something else like another Leaf or Giovanni, Sabrina, Potion, something like that. That's just me personally. And then the blue, I'm not entirely sold on this version of the deck here. But if there's something I'm missing, let me know, point it out, and, I can correct myself. All right, and moving on to Tier 4. This is the last tier in the meta report. So we got a lot of decks here. Let's take it one by one. We got Blaine coming in at the top of Tier 4. Blaine actually got a lot of new cards to play with. So this Ponyta just does 10 damage, but it has a coin flip for potential to do 40 damage. So depending whether or not you think that's worth that, you can run this instead of the other Ponyta, which just does a flat 20 damage. And then we have this new Rapidash, which actually I think this Rapidash is an upgrade from the old Rapidash. Now, the old Rapidash, you did like to use it when you would go first because you can evolve first and attack with 1 energy. But I think this Rapidash is just really good that you just probably want to use this one instead. At least, maybe, it depends on how you build your deck. But I would say, like, generally, if you just kind of want to build a deck real quick, I think this Rapidash is kind of the go-to one now. For 2 energy, it does 40 damage, but you flip a coin. If heads, it does 60 more damage for 100 damage. So for 2 energy, a potential 100 damage is very strong. It's also running 2 Vulpix, 2 Ninetales, and 2 Moltres EX. Rest of the trainer cards look pretty standard here. Of course, you're going to be wanting to run 2 Blaines in this list. This one is running just the Rapidash and the Ninetales. No Moltres or Magmar. Does run a lot more support cards. So it does look like this is just getting out your Ninetales and Rapidash as soon as possible and just trying to deal as much damage as you can. So I think there's a little bit of room for variety in Blaine decks. This one is running a 1 of Mew. Again, we're going to see Mew pop up in just a lot of these decks. This one's running a 1 of the new Magmar. In my opinion, this card sucks. I think this card is just a worse version of the Magmar we have now from Genetic Apex. The original Magmar takes 2 energy to attack for 50 damage. I know that's not great, but it's a basic Pokemon. You don't need to evolve it. Now this one has essentially the same stats. It takes 2 fire energy to attack for 80 damage, but it discards 2 fire energy. I think that's just too much for this Pokemon. I think that's just too costly. It works with Charizard, right? Because Charizard's attack for 200 damage discards 2 fire energy, but 200 damage is clearing literally any Pokemon in the game, so it's worth it. 80 damage to discard 2 fire energy, I don't think it's worth it. Ninetales is just better. It does 90 damage, discarding 1 fire energy. Yeah, so I do not like this new Magmar at all. I think it's just bad in my opinion. And then of course this one's running the good Magmar. I'm actually a big fan of this Magmar card because it can threaten for 80 damage when you have Blaine. So you're just threatening 80 damage at all times when this Pokemon is on the board. And of course, since this is a fire deck, this is going to go well into the Celebi matchup since you do have the type advantage there. And taking a look at the rest of the decks here, looks pretty similar, just kind of the Pokemon maybe be slightly different. This one's running a Farfetch'd. I don't think you really need a Farfetch'd in this deck. And there may be slight differences in the trainer cards, but I would say for the most part, this is the core of the deck here with 2 Vulpix, 2 Ninetales, 2 Ponytas, and 2 of the new Rapidash. And then from there, you can kind of mix and match the trainers and support cards. Oh, and then 2 Blaine, of course, right? You can't play a Blaine deck without Blaine himself. So this is still a decent deck. It's going to be good into those grass decks, but I don't think this can compete with some of the other things at the top of the meta, such as like Mewtwo decks or Gyarados EX, since Gyarados has a really high HP amount. So I think this is going to get crushed by Gyarados, especially since it's fire. It's just automatically weak to water. So yeah, this deck is going to get killed by Gyarados, which I think is why it's more towards the bottom of the tier list. Okay, next up on tier 4, we got Starmie EX. Now, there's a bunch of different ways to play Starmie, as we can see from these cards here. You can play Starmie EX with Articuno, Vaporeon, Greninja, Gyarados, Mew. There's a ton of different ways to play the deck, so let's take a look at some actual deck lists here. Now, this one, to me, just looks like a Gyarados deck that's kind of just running Starmie, but what is interesting is they are running 1 basic Gyarados and 1 Gyarados EX. I wonder if it's like, if that was intentional, or maybe they were just like, well, I only got 1 Gyarados EX, so I'm just going to put in the basic one. I'm not sure. But yeah, Starmie EX is still a really good card. 130 HP, doing 90 damage for 2 energy with a free retreat cost. You can do some damage in the early game with the Starmie EX, then retreat it, put your Gyarados EX on the active spot, and then swap that energy from your Starmie to the Gyarados with the Vaporeon. And then of course you're going to be wanting to run 2 Misties in these water decks. Let's take a look at some other versions here. Yeah, this, to me, this is not really a Starmie deck, but rather it's just a Gyarados deck with Starmie in it, right? That's the way I see it. Maybe you guys see it differently, but to me, Starmie EX is just kind of stalling. And yes, sometimes it can single-handedly win you the game and you don't even need Gyarados EX. But to me, it looks like you're going to want to start off with Starmie EX, just do some damage, and then once it gets low on HP, you retreat it and put in your Gyarados EX. So that's how I see this deck. This one's a little bit different. Now, this one I would say actually is a Starmie EX deck. This one is running 2 Starmie EX, and then 2 of the Greninjas, and then 1 Articuno EX. Nothing too crazy here. It's just good cards, right? All it is. It's just Starmie does 90 damage for 2 energy. Greninja has one of the best abilities in the game. Articuno EX just does really good damage, 40 damage for 2 energy, 80 damage for 3 energy, while also damaging your opponent's bench. So you can chip away at your opponent's bench with Greninja and Articuno, and then you can deal some heavy damage with your Starmie EX. This one's actually just running Articuno, Starmie, and Vaporeon, no Gyarados. This one's a little bit more interesting. So you can attack with the Starmie, pull it back, retreat for free, and then swap that energy over to your Articuno EX with the Vaporeon. This one looks kind of fun as well to try out. And then this one is running just Starmie and Greninja. So there's a couple different ways to play this deck, right? You got Starmie, Greninja, Vaporeon, Articuno, Gyarados. Those seem to be the main cards in the deck. And then I would say you probably just want 2 Misties in most of these water decks. and then kind of go from there. Right there, you can decide if you want to play Sabrina, you want to play Giovanni, Leaf, Potion, X Speed, what other Pokemon and item cards that you want to play. So Starmie EX still really good in the meta. Next up in tier 4, we got my boy Pidgeot EX. I was really hyped on this card. Now, Pidgeot EX, since it is a normal Pokemon, there's going to be a ton of different ways to play this, right? You can see in here, again, this is not an even 20 because this is not one deck, but this is showing what cards are most popular in Pidgeot EX decks. Professor's research at 100%, 2 Pidgeot, 92%, Pokeballs, Pidgeys, Pokemon Flute, Giovanni, Sabrina, Leaf, Pidgeotto, Druddigon, and then from there on it kind of splits off into other different versions. Like you can play Wheezing Coughing, you can play Chatot, Sigilyph, Aerodactyl, Marshadow. Like there's just so much variety you can do with this deck since it is a normal type Pokemon. Let's take a look at some actual deck lists here. This is top 32, 256 player tournament. It's running 2 of the new Pidgey, which essentially just has 10 less HP, but does 10 more damage, which I do like this Pidgey over the Genetic Apex one. And then the Genetic Apex Pidgeotto over the Mythical Island Pidgeotto. I prefer this one as well, since it attacks for 1 energy instead of 3. 2 Pidgeot EX. This one actually runs one of the basic Pidgeot, which this Pokemon is still good, right? Because its ability is just essentially a free Sabrina once per turn, but it only attacks for 70 damage. So it is fairly weak, but I do like that they have both this Pidgeot and the Pidgeot EX. This one is running, oh my gosh, this deck's kind of all over the place. It's running one of the new Coughing, one of the Genetic Apex Coughing, and then 1 Genetic Apex Wheezing, and 1 Mythical Island Wheezing. I actually don't really see people play this one. This one has similar stats, Dark type, 110 HP. For 2 Dark Energy, does Smoke Screen for 50 damage. During your opponent's next turn, if the defending Pokemon tries to use an attack, your opponent flips a coin. If tails, that attack doesn't happen. I can see this being good as a stall card in some scenarios, but I think I'd rather just take the Wheezing that has the ability to poison and then just tackles for 30 rather than having to rely on a coin flip. That's just me. This one's running 2 Pokeballs, 1 of Pokeflute. I think 1 of Pokeflute, at least 1, is going to be required in every Pidgeot EX deck because it attack scales on how many Pokemon are on your opponent's bench, and Pokemon Flute can bring a basic Pokemon that has been KO'd or discarded back onto their bench for an additional 20 damage for your Pidgeot EX. Then we're running Research, Leaf, and Koga here. I actually don't think you even need to run Leaf in this deck because Pidgeot EX and the normal Pidgeot are just retreating for 1 energy. So Koga makes sense, but Leaf, I don't think you need Leaf. I think you can run X Speed and that will be fine. This one is slightly different. This one is running Druddigon as a tank. Druddigon is probably now the best tank in the game. Then you have Sigilyph, so you can run Psychic Energy in this deck, attach 1 Psychic Energy, and then start drawing cards with the Sigilyph. I really like this card. I'm super high on this one. I played this card in my Pidgeot EX deck list because it has 80 HP. It can tank damage for you, and the fact that it draws cards makes this deck more consistent, because one of the biggest problems with the Stage 2 Pokemon decks is that you're not finding the evolution that you need, right? So sometimes you have Pidgeotto, you don't have Pidgeot EX, or you have Pidgeot EX and Pidgey, but you're missing the Pidgeotto. So Sigilyph is going to help with that consistency there. This version's a little bit different. This is running Old Amber and the Aerodactyl EX. I'm not sure what exactly is the strategy with this one. I know Aerodactyl does have its ability where your opponent can't evolve their active Pokemon, but maybe it's just to make this deck more consistent with the fossils, since the fossils can't be grabbed by Pokeballs. Oh, they're not even playing Pokeballs in this deck, which is interesting. Okay, so they're not playing Pokeballs. They're playing the Amber, and then 80 damage for 2 energy is decent, right? But, I'm not exactly quite sure what is the strategy with this deck. If you guys know, let me know down in the comments below. And then this one is running the new Pidgey. The new Pidgeotto, I am not a fan of this one because it takes 3 energy to attack. Yes, it does 50 damage, and it has 90 HP compared to the other Pidgeotto's 80 HP. But I'd rather take the other Pidgeotto because it attacks for 1 energy. Then this one is running 2 Druddigon as a tank, one of Mew. Again, Mew can just slot into any deck. It can serve as a tank. It can also surprise people with its genome hacking ability. Then you got Research, Sabrina, Giovanni, Leaf, Pokeflute, and Pokeball. This one is running Druddigons and then Kangaskhan as an additional tank. I'm not too big of a fan on Kangaskhan, but I guess I could see it makes sense if you're playing Leaf. And this one's just running 2 Pidgeot EX lines and then 2 Weezing lines. So I can go on and on. Essentially, there are a ton of different ways to play Pidgeot EX. My favorite way personally to play the deck has been the deck that I used on my channel. I posted a video a few days ago. Essentially, it's just running Sigilyph plus the alien card, the BEM, that scales with how many Pokemon are on your opponent's bench. So its ability is essentially the same as Pidgeot EX, and combined with Pokeflute, it's very strong. All right, next up, tier 4, we got Greninja. Now, Greninja, when you say Greninja, like, you gotta be more specific, right? Because Greninja is a card that can fit into literally any deck. I do see this being played often in a lot of 2-color decks, or sometimes even 3-color decks. So let's take a look, see what we have here. This one is the Greninja Druddigon deck with the new Tauros and Mew EX as well. This is a deck I made a video on recently as well. The game plan here is really just to do some chip damage with your Druddigon, have it tank some hits in the front line while you build up your Greninja, do some chip damage with Greninja's ability, and then you can finish off your opponent's Pokemon with this Tauros because it does 120 damage to EX Pokemon. Or you could also build up your Mew EX and use genome hacking to copy your opponent's Pokemon's moves here. Now, I think this person's running 2x speed and 1 Leaf. I think with the Druddigon, you probably want to run 2 Leaf, but that's just my opinion. This one doesn't run Mew at all. I think this is probably a little bit more similar to what I was running. It is running 2 Greninja lines, 2 Druddigon, 2 of the new Tauros, and then 2 Leafs as well, and then 2 Giovannis. I think Giovanni goes well with this Tauros because it pushes this Tauros to 130 damage, which means that you can one-shot Celebi EX. Now, this one's a bit spicy. I think this one, I assume, is running water and fire energy. You can't tell from the website what energy they're running. That is important because Greninja is played in a lot of multi-type decks, but I assume this one is playing water and fire. This is playing Salandit and Salazzle. I actually like this new Salazzle we got from Mythical Island. Just does 30 damage for 1 energy, but it poisons your opponent's active Pokemon. They are running this new Salandit, which this Salandit I don't think makes sense in this deck because this Salandit is going to do 50 damage if your opponent's Pokemon is poisoned, and the only form of poison we have here is the Salazzle. So I don't think this Salandit actually makes sense in this deck specifically. I think you would want to run just the basic Salandit, and then this makes more sense in like a Weezing or Scolipede deck. And then this one is running Greninja and the Flareon combo. I have seen this pop up as well, since both of these are pretty good for dual color decks. They kind of seem to naturally just go together, since Greninja takes 1 water energy and 1 colorless energy to attack. Flareon takes 1 fire energy and 2 colorless energy to attack. So these kind of naturally work well together. You can kind of pivot into different matchups. Against the fire deck, you can lean into Greninja, and then against grass decks or Celebi EX decks more specifically, you can lean into Flareon, which does 110 damage, plus the weakness onto grass does 130 damage, which means this is able to one-shot Celebi EX. So there's a few different ways to play this Greninja deck. I wouldn't actually just call it a Greninja deck. I would call it like Greninja Druddigon deck, because I think these two work really well together, just chipping away damage at your opponent's active Pokemon, and then you can finish it off with the Tauros here. And then, yeah, 2 Leaf. Leaf, I think, is essential for this deck with the Druddigon, because Druddigon retreats for 2, and then you can retreat for free with Leaf. Giovanni to push Tauros to 130. Research for some draw power, Pokeballs, 1x speed, 1 Sabrina. This might be my favorite list here. This is a top 8 placing deck here out of 216 players. This might be the best looking list that I've seen from these decks, but there are a lot of different ways to play this deck. All right, and finally, last but not least, everybody's favorite, we got Articuno EX. So Articuno EX is a deck that has been around since the very beginning of the game. Let's take a look at some deck examples here. This is just running 2 Articunos, 2 Greninja lines, and a whole bunch of trainer cards. Nothing too fancy, right? It's just good cards. Articuno is just able to deal damage for 2 energy, 40 damage, and then Blizzard 80 damage for 3 energy, while also chipping away at your opponent's bench, and then Greninja can chip away at the bench as well. I think this deck has kind of fallen off though. I think Gyarados is probably just a stronger version of this deck. And then this is running the one of basic Articuno, which can serve as a tank, but it can also potentially paralyze your opponent's Pokemon, which is really nice. So most of these decks look kind of similar. This one is running the new Vaporeon, which honestly, I don't know if you really need to run Vaporeon with Articuno. I don't really see the point in that personally. This is running a one of Mew, but this did get second place in 128 player tournament. So maybe I'm missing something here. Okay, I guess I could see it where like you are playing your Mew EX and then you're tanking damage and then you're building up water energy in the back and then you put in your Articuno. I guess I could see it, but still I'm not completely sold on it. This one is running Kangaskhan as a tank, and this one is running Mew and Vaporeon. So yeah, for the most part from here on out, the decks are mostly similar. I would say this is probably going to be what looks like the main version here is 2 Articuno, 2 Greninja lines, 2 Misty, 2 Research, 2 Pokeballs, and then you can kind of add any other trainer cards or supporter cards or maybe any other one of basic Pokemon as well. This one got top 32, 1500 player tournament, runs a one of basic Articuno, which I am a big fan of this card. But I think all in all, Articuno EX is not as strong as it used to be. And that is the tier list. But look at this. Actually, literally, while I was recording, the tier list actually updated Gyarados EX to tier 1. So Gyarados EX is now tier 1 alongside Mewtwo EX. This is actually really interesting that this happened literally while I was recording. I know a lot of people are really high on Gyarados EX right now. It won some tournaments. It got a lot of tournament placings. So people are definitely going to be picking up this deck more often. So Gyarados EX, literally while I was recording this video, just bumped up to tier 1. I guess they were still updating some of the tournament data. But that's the tier list. Let me know what you think. Does this look accurate to you guys? Are there any decks that are missing? I know there's probably going to be some decks that are missing. One I pointed out earlier was going to be Golem. Golem is not on this list yet, but I think we'll probably see it pop up next week when I do another meta report. And again, this list is ever changing. Like I said, it's going to change. Literally, Gyarados EX was tier 2 at the beginning when I started recording, but now at the end it is now tier 1. So let me know what you guys think about this tier list. Do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? You think something should be higher, lower? Any other notable mentions that are not in this tier list? Let me know what you think. Once again, shout out to PokemonMeta.com. I'll leave a link to their website down in the description below if you want to check this out for yourself. And I will do another meta report follow-up next week. So thank you guys for watching. Appreciate you all, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.